Right, we will go on to item 12. This is Citizens Advice Bureau funding model options. I think Dickie and Duncan coming forward on this one. Oh, Ken, sorry. Are you going to lead off, Ken? Or? Yeah. Kia ora. And welcome in your new role. Ken, congratulations. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Ko Alima Manu Kenneth Aliputea Taku ingoa. I am the new General Manager of the Community Wellbeing Department. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to introduce also Dickie Humphreys, Head of Community Impact, and Duncan McLagan, a Manager of Community Partnership and Investment. We are here seeking approval for the new funding model for ACAB Incorporated, which aligns closely with their 3-year newly developed strategic plan. I'll now pass it over to the team to talk you through the context and provide information.
Tēnā koutou ngā mema o te komiti nei. I'd like to start by acknowledging the presence of the chair and a few other board members of ACAB who are present in the room in the public gallery here today. I also understand that the committee is become very much under a time pressure potentially. Okay, so I'm going to defer my commentary on the historic context and allow Duncan to speak directly to the options that are before you today. I'll stay at the table in case there are any questions relating to that, but in the interest of time, I'll pass to Duncan to get to the issue at hand.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Duncan McLagan hoku ingoa. So we're here today to talk about the options for a new funding model that supports the strategic plan for ACAB and CAB services across Tamaki Makaurau. So I'm going to, in the interest of time and respect for the agenda, slightly skip through a few things. Members had the opportunity to be made aware of the new strategic plan for CAB services at a previous meeting. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to review that plan and looked at the opportunities that that presents. So it's focused on meeting the needs of clients in a changing environment. Obviously we have increasing desire for services to be physically based, but also online, on the phone, and via email as well. So the model we're presenting today and looking for your support on is a flexible model which allows ACAB to work with the other CAB Bureau to deliver on that strategic plan for Auckland. And just like to acknowledge that the strategic plan was led by ACAB with its Bureau and was informed by and discussed with us in its formation. So where does ACAB see our regional services going? We're looking at this is a bit of a blunt presentation, I suppose. It gives the essence of where the strategic plan is heading and why we need a funding model to support that. So historically, or currently, we've got 9 incorporated societies. Those work reasonably individually. They are focused on supporting the Bureau within their clusters. The governance costs and models that they use are obviously individual to those particular bureau and clusters, and they are physically based. At the moment, the current funding model supports a very physical approach through people coming to CAB services, and the future is looking at how that service culture can reach out more to the public and to communities across Tamaki Makaurau, working across regional hubs, looking at shared learning and training, looking at reduced governance costs and being a bit more outward looking. And this is from the CAB strategic plan. So I won't go into the full detail. I had a lovely slide deck for you, and we'll make that a lot shorter. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to read the report, and hopefully the report was clear. So the funding model options presented to you include no change. So that would support the current funding model, which is essentially branch or office based. and is not supported by ACAB or staff. We have a sub-regional model, so this is looking at supporting through clusters. There are currently existing clusters in the north, which will look to include Welsford, in the west, and central east, and then we have 5 southern bureau. That model would essentially put the control of investment into bureau services at that cluster level, with ACAB supporting the investment into the southern bureau in consultation with those bureau. And they'll retain a small amount of money for strategic development, so that's leading out on the key parts of their strategic plan. The model that is supported by staff and is supported by ACAB and also 17 of 20 local boards that responded to the request for feedback is actually to move to a more flexible model, a model that allows for the full application of the strategic plan for ACAB across Tamaki Makaurau. So that's a bulk fund model. This is not unusual for council. We see the regional amenities grants generally being in this model, and it allocates across services while advancing the priorities from the strategic plan. Missing all that beautiful feedback there. Just in terms of implementation mitigations, obviously we respect the fact that many members and councillors see great value in the physical sites operating CAB services within their communities. We thought it was really important that if we're moving to a high trust model through a bulk fund, that we respect also that this may be a time, there may be some time needed to embed what that looks like in terms of the future of the services through the strategic plan. So we've ensured that changes to any physical services won't be proposed within the first year of the funding model, and any future discussions around the delivery of services through physical office space is consulted on with that community and with Auckland Council. Pātai.
Oh, Councillor Fletcher.
Do you see this option, which, by the way, I think is the right way to proceed, affecting and have our representatives here from CAB having any impact on encouraging volunteerism?
One of the 5 strategic outcomes from the plan is to better support and increase volunteering within the service. So it's really, we know that it's challenging to get volunteers. We know that it's challenging to support volunteers if you're just an individual bureau doing that. So this does really give the opportunity to really invest into supporting volunteers and recruiting volunteers.
Chair, I won't speak later, but I think this is an excellent piece of work and I'm happy to move or second it. And I want to acknowledge also CAB who are here today. This is a really wonderful service for our community.
Kia ora, Councillor Fletcher. I'm happy to second your motion. Councillor Newman. And did I see a hand from you, Councillor Watson? Councillor Watson. Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you. Can I ask the officers, with respect to this interest in the reserves, the financial reserves of the Bureau, are you referring to the financial reserves of Bureau who operate as incorporated societies?
With respect to the accumulated funds situation, that's not the obviously the topic of this particular report, but operationally, the former director worked with the chair of ACAB to look at the accumulated funds situation across the network and identify where there's opportunities to ensure that accumulated funds are being used for the services with which they've been granted within the time frame of which they've been granted. So it's fairly standard advice throughout not-for-profits to be operating to a 3 to 6 month reserves policy. Where that accumulated fund in any organisation falls above that, it's generally incumbent on a funder to inquire as to why, and also to look to ensure that they have a reserves management plan in place, just to ensure if anything falls out of what the grant's provided for in the first place, that there's good reasoning for that, and that in the case of ACAB, that we, as the funder, have the opportunity to review those reserve management plans and ensure that ratepayers are getting the best value for money of that investment into CAB services.
Yeah, right. So these are incorporated societies, not legal entities for you or me or an officer, director, current or otherwise, to make inquiries into and direct separate legal entities. But if those inquiries have taken place, for example, the Papakura Bureau has operated reserves in order to fund the operation of a new bureau in Pukekohe. It's likely now that the Papakura Bureau will probably withdraw that service in Pukekohe. So the presentation indicates that there'll be no bureau closing in 24-25. Are you anticipating that have you been aware of the potential for closure of individual bureau in years beyond that?
Tēnā koe mō te pātai. The funding model that is the preferred funding model, the bulk funding model, supports CAB's, ACAB's strategic plan shift. That strategic plan does not preclude or disable any particular site to be able to undertake change in their services, and that if there's anything that indicates a significant change in a particular locality, then they've undertaken to do that with due consultation.
Respectfully, that wasn't my question. You've indicated in your slide that there'll be no closures in 24-25. I'm asking you if you're aware of closures in out years. Are you anticipating closures in out years?
The point of the bulk fund is obviously to shift responsibility around that kind of decision to CAB services. At the moment, we have a situation in which we're quite directive in terms of the nature of the services that are provided, whether that's a physical office or otherwise. The point the model is trying to get to is to allow those decisions to actually be made by the organisation rather than council itself. However, ensuring that outside of this next financial year, that in any future financial years, when there's a proposal to close any physical offices, that discussion is had respectfully with council and with communities that would be impacted.
Sorry, one more time, Chair. Have the officers got any sense of the prospect of closures of bureaus beyond year 24-25? I understand what the presentation shows in the PowerPoint, but this is the third time I've asked it. If the officers don't want to answer that question, that's fine. I would be very keen for them to provide some sort of response as to whether they anticipate closures, not process, just whether they anticipate closures. I anticipate closures, do they?
No, I can't answer that question because ultimately it's up to CAB to make that decision.
One final question, Chair. With respect to CABX, is that a legal entity that can apply for funding the same way as the incorporated societies, the individual bureaus can apply for external funding? What is the nature of CABX for the purpose of funding applications?
Yes, so CABX is an entity and it would be able to seek further funding from alternative sources.
And what alternate funding have they sought and received to date?
So at the moment, there's a request on behalf of the chair of ACAB and the mayor's office to seek government investment in CAB services in Auckland. We don't know what the outcome of that particular request is as yet. And just to reassure councillors that that option is always open. Obviously, the council decided through the long-term plan to invest in CAB services over the next 3 years, but we will continue to work alongside CAB to look at any opportunities to receive further funding, whether that be from a philanthropic organisation or whether that be from central government.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if a philanthropic will be granting it, but my one final last question, Chair, if I may. The South, is the South fully represented with all of its opportunity to have equal representation on CABX? Are officers in a position to confirm that we're fully represented?
So those particular bureau are represented on CABX, and I believe at the moment the position is vacant, although they have made several approaches to those bureau to ensure that they do have a panel member on CABX's board. And in saying that, the model is based on the strategic plan. All bureau and volunteers and managers and boards have contributed to the development of that strategic plan.
I reserve my right to speak, Chair. I'd like to be able to comment later on. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. I have quite a number of questions now. Councillor Watson.
I think Councillor Newman has perhaps preempted my question, but I'm just really seeking just clarification in terms of the disadvantages and challenges of option 3 as outlined in the paper, and it goes to the phrase optimising locations of physical sites. So that jargon just means potentially closing down sites, doesn't it? But as it stands, that there is no no sense of if that may be necessary or not from your perspective.
Through the chair, ultimately, based on the funding model proposal, that decision is for CAB and ACAB to make those decisions around physical sites and the future of physical sites in consultation with council and with their community.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thanks, team. My questions are because I know, like in my area, the CABs there are always struggling for money. They basically have no money. They're always, when I was on the local board, approaching us and telling us that and begging for money to deliver the crucial services that they do deliver for our area. So are you able to tell us how option 3 would better address those sorts of issues for CABs like mine, like those in the Manukau ward? Kia ora.
So through the chair, obviously the decision around which model is chosen doesn't impact the independence of any single bureau. They would still be entitled to seek, if they needed to seek further funding from funders within their community or within the region. So there is still that flexibility to seek further funding if they feel that there's an important shortfall between the operational grant that they receive through council and the services that they wish to provide to their community. Ultimately, the decision around how much is received becomes a negotiation within the CAB network around what's appropriate to deliver the services required in that community, obviously having to be balanced against the fact that it's a network with a number of operations across the region. One would also hope that there would be some approach to shared services in terms of training, support, administration that might be able to alleviate some of that cost pressure on any individual bureau.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just follow that up, just to get you to clarify that a little bit more. I guess what I'm asking is what is the difference, and I think it's that flexibility you talked about at the start. If you could explain that a bit better, what's the difference between the current model and then that flexibility in option 3 that staff seem to like?
Yeah, so it's quite a substantial difference. It is moving to more of a high trust model in terms of allowing CABs to look at their services and development of services from a regional perspective. At the moment, we have a situation in which the funding model just directs a certain amount of funding to an individual physical site, essentially. So if we're looking at issues that matter across the network as a whole, across the city as a whole, into communities across the city as a whole, for example, Māori or Pacific communities, the option 3 model aims to ensure that they can provide that investment in development and volunteering and cultural capacity across evenly across the network, rather than an individual bureau having to kind of feel they have to do that on their own or invest in that on their own. That would be where they would like to get to with this more flexible approach.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you, gentlemen. Couple of questions. One, I guess I'm just trying to understand the potential of dispute. Obviously, CABX suddenly, from governance perspective, will have to make some, big calls and be good governors. Do we understand how, if one sub-region felt it wasn't being treated fairly, just taking devil's advocate's position here, because it could happen, is there any type of formal dispute system set up at the moment, or can you elaborate perhaps a little bit of understanding how that might be approached by CABX, and do we get involved at any point in time if it really goes off the rails?
So through the chair, I'd need to get the detail of that from CABX itself. I'm, to date, not aware of any particular issue that's arisen where a sort of a dispute resolution situation would arise. Obviously, with a new model, the representatives from the clusters and the individual bureaus that sit on that board will need to be looking at how the investment is best made from a network perspective. That will be new, and we will look to support them as much as possible in being able to apply that new model. Hence the reason we're looking at mitigations around any changes to sites in the first year, because it kind of takes the pressure out of it a little bit for us to be able to support the ACAB board to be able to work with the new reality and support them in the application of the strategic plan.
I'm sure they will do a great job. I just need to ask that question, so thank you for answering it. I guess the other one was clause 20B. That's just around this approach that's been made to central government about, I guess you want to increase the pool, in my mind, rather than perhaps trying to divvy it up with more coming from other sources, potentially. So I think before I said, I think that's for early days. We don't know, we haven't got an indication yet from the new government if they're willing to enter that conversation yet.
So as far as we're aware, as of today's date, we haven't had a response from the Minister in relation to that joint letter from the Mayor's office and the Chair of ACAB-X.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā koe, Duncan, kia ora ana, Tiki and Malo Lava, la wawhinga aluputia. Look, I want to go to 14 on our agenda, and 14 has the structure. Duncan, you mentioned earlier that there's 2 representatives on ACABs from the south was mentioned. So can you also confirm that there's 2 members on, what membership representatives do you have on ACAB, not ACABs with an X?
Could I just clarify the question, Councillor Filipaina?
So with the with the structure there, you've got ACAB, ACAB, and that is just giving us all the CABs in Tamaki Makaurau. Am I correct?
Yeah, sorry, I see what you mean now. So
yeah, and so all of the members on those 4 sub-regional charts you've got, they are all members of ACAB.
Yes, is the answer to that.
Yeah.
And in terms of the representation on ACAB X, the regional body, there's 2 representatives that should come from that group that's set on the ACAB X board.
Yeah. So what options are there to increase the membership of ACABs when you look at basically the 2 biggest sites, which is Auckland City CAB and South Auckland. I mean, even when you look at North Shore CAB as well, with 8 sites, so they're very similar in size. What options do they have around having good representation then? 1 at the moment for North Shore and 2 in the Auckland City and South Auckland entities on ACAB X.
Through the chair, I think that's a really pertinent question, and I think that's something that we as council need to keep addressing to ensure that the representation on ACAB X is meeting the needs of those clusters in a way that represents the services that are provided across those clusters. So I think it's a good question, and I think it's something that we will ensure comes up in terms of our relationship with ACAB. So staff's relationship is obviously directly with ACAB X, and we will look to ensure that there is strong representation of those clusters in that model, if that model should be the one that we go ahead with.
Okay, supplementary, I've got 20B, and Councillor Sayers did mention it, and you commented on it earlier, Duncan, around the advocacy to the Minister for the Community and Voluntary Sector around funding possibly coming from central government. If there is no funding, I'm assuming that our money is still the same, and it'll still be, if option 3 is adopted, will be then allocated through ACABX.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. So through the LTP process, what we are describing as full council funding is provided for those 3 years of the LTP, and the levels have been identified with CPI adjustment.
Okay, sorry, Chair, there's about 2 or 3, but Duncan, I want to go to option 2, sub-regional model number 34, and there's a mention of 150,000 per annum for advancing strategic service. Now, if option 3 is adopted, will that 150,000 still follow option 3?
So ultimately, with option 3, because it's a bulk fund model, it becomes the decision of ACABX and its membership as to how it invests in the delivery of the strategic plan. I think they would like to ensure that they have the capacity to be able to deliver on those outcomes as much as they can, but recognising the fact that the money they're receiving is primarily to deliver the service as best as possible. So again, it comes back to that issue that option 3 is a high trust model. We will work with ACAB to ensure that we can see delivery of the strategic plan, and one of the primary ways we'll do that is through expectations in the funding agreement. But obviously, being a flexible model, it's a bit higher trust in terms of how we dictate what is invested in what particular activities.
So, Duncan, you're just saying that basically we can guide, but it's totally up to ACABX as to how they allocate.
Essentially, yes, that's correct. And similar to models that we apply through the Regional Amenities Fund, for example, so with Northern Lifesaving, a bulk fund model is a high trust model, and it does put more responsibility, I suppose, on staff to ensure that we have a really robust funding agreement and that we're working in a relationship with CAB services rather than sort of doing a funding agreement and dropping and running, that we are continuing to work with them to ensure that the outcomes from that funding agreement are realised, and that council, in terms of being their primary funder, is respected in terms of the needs that we want to see them invest in.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but totally it's up to ACABX. Can I then, Chair, want to go through to table 39 under the current model number 1, the analysis and assessment. What you've got there is based on existing operational costs in each bureau, transitioning to 90% population, 10% deprivation funding. Can you tell me the current strategic and operational plan, or one that ACABX is trying to do, would that have a 10% deprivation?
Again, in terms of the strategic plan, it's a little bit different than the current funding model. At the moment, the current funding model is very, essentially, I don't want to use the word dictates, but does dictate from council how much we want them to spend on X and how much we want to spend them on Y. In terms of deprivation investment, we feel, and ACAB feels, that the regional model, the more flexible model, actually gives a greater opportunity to invest in issues that address deprivation at a regional level, rather than having to have that funded by each individual physical site, which would need to happen at the moment. So, for example, if they had volunteers looking to engage in a particular program that cost money, that would ultimately be the responsibility of that particular bureau. The regional funding model would give more or greater opportunity to apply that learning and to apply that capacity building across the network as a whole. So it's quite a different approach. The current funding model is quite a blunt instrument, very much funds on the basis of a particular office, which is generally a particular bureau, solely for that physical site. The third funding model is much more flexible in terms of how the outcomes are realised at a regional level.
Okay, Chair, last one. For those sites that are in council premises, those sites, and I've read in the report that there is a month by month lease. Who will be in charge of those leases?
So through the chair, that sits with the leasing team within parks and community facilities.
Right, so at the moment it's a month by month. Does that mean to me, because that's what it indicates, is that there's a possibility that these premises that some of the CABs are currently in, which is owned by council, may end up being either charged more or may be asked to leave? Is that a possibility?
Through the chair, just in relation to costs of leasing, there were some changes made through, I believe, the last annual budget, which did impact the maintenance costs and the tenancy fees in relation to council premises. So in acknowledgement of the fact that for some partners, including ACAB, that could have quite a substantial impact on their costs of leasing council services, the leasing team has supported the transition to ensure that we can go on a month-by-month basis to support ACAB services to get ready for any changes that happen to come in terms of their leasing costs in future.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and I reserve my right to speak.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Mayor Brown.
Okay, thanks, guys. I just want you to confirm a couple of things. Given that a lot of what CAB do is being a shop front for the government, am I right in assuming that the option 3 makes that easier to get more money out of the government?
Don't want to talk on behalf of the government, but what I will say is that obviously, if, like any business or any not-for-profit organisation, if you've got a strong, consistent offer, it's probably going to be easier to obtain funding from government or from a philanthropic organisation, grant funder.
Okay, well, that was one of the things I wanted you to do, so well done. And now the other one was the question of accumulated funds was raised, and it was I just want to know that you or somebody else downstairs in the vast enterprise that apparently I've got some control over, but not much, is keeping an eye on accumulated funds all over the place, because some of the BIDs, like the Heart of the City, had $1.5 million of accumulated funds and were wanting us to pay for things that they should be doing. There's local boards have got quite often the whole I don't want to encourage people having to just spend to get rid of the stuff, but it seems wrong to me that we should be sacking ratepayers in order to fund any organisation within this that has a whole pile of money they haven't got round to using. So is there someone in there? Is it you? Or I know you're the manager of something or other with a good name in it, community partnerships. Everyone has great titles in this organisation. But is there somebody, are we keeping an eye on unjustified accumulated funds? It might be a justified, they're saving up some money to buy something or other, I don't know, but
Through
I
the
don't
chair,
like
Mr.
the idea of it.
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question. We will go away and come back to you with an answer in regards to how council is getting visibility of accumulated funds across organisations that are relevant.
There are some times when it's justified, but there are some times that it sits there for bloody years and you think, why are we sacking the ratepayers? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I did note that 17 out of the 21 working local boards are in favour of what you're doing, so it can't be too bad. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Member Wilcox.
Thank you for the report. I'm looking at number 51. You say Māori represent 9%, and it's a disproportionate experience. I'm kind of struggling with that a little bit. If the Māori make up 14% of our population, why is only 9% turning up? That's the first question. Thank you.
Tēnā koe matua mō te pātai. That's the exact insight. So under the current service model, the evidence shows it is not responsive to the needs of Māori or how Māori choose to interact with a service. The regional model enables enables ACAB to stand up multiple service models. They can include direct outreach to marae and not the expectation that Māori must walk through their door. It can include school-based programs for school leavers. For example, they're standing up one at the moment with a focus on rangatahi Māori school leavers. They recognise, they understand through their own evidence and statistics that the current service model does not serve Māori. But a regional model that will give them flexibility to try multiple ways of delivering a service and a commitment to bring more Māori into their own governance and a commitment to seek Māori leads of those particular projects with a focus on engaging with Māori is the commitment that the ACAP has provided to us in our information, and which is also why staff recommend the regional, more flexible, bulk-funded approach, because that allows ACAB to try more different things to get the service right.
Okay, thank you. My second question is on 10 of the presentation, Māori impact statement. It says efforts to increase Māori representation on ACAB's board and to identify Māori leads for projects. Pēhā tēnā?
Pēhā nā rātou e te mahia tēnā.
What actually are CABIX going to do to get Māori to go on to these kaupapa efforts to increase Māori representation? I mean, they're all right to say it, but what exactly are they going to do?
Ai te tika. So if it pleases the chair, through the chair, we can seek that advice from ACAB and return to the committee with that information.
And so the final one is, it's the kaupapa of trust. It's a shame we're not doing that for marae and Māori kaupapa, but never mind. Going back to the kaupapa, my concern is because it's a lot of the work is done by volunteers, and I learned this at my time at the surf club. If you make it too hard, volunteers get hoha. So, I mean, if they have to continually report back in the end they go, oh, what's the use? I'll go home and make a cup of tea and play with my mokos. So I suppose I want to understand, how are we as council going to ensure that we get that accountability, but we don't have to burden a voluntary organisation with more paperwork and bureaucracy?
Tēnā koe, and thank you for that question. I think it's really pertinent in terms of the pressure that volunteers feel to be able to contribute the time that they do. Two things there. One, in terms of any new funding agreement and how it's reported on, we actually worked with ACAB to set up a steering group about what that reporting would look like, and obviously with our need to ensure that it's manageable while delivering value that council wants to see from the investment. So that subgroup exists. It's finalised how it will look at reporting, and as far as I'm aware, has been a very good and productive discussion between council staff and CAB representatives as well.
Thank you, Member Wilcox. And last question from Deputy Chair, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work that you've done. I know it's been huge. I have two questions. One is around, we've talked about the flexibility that will be provided, but we haven't really talked as much about the equitable funding model that this is going to present itself. I just wondered if you knew or have the examples where currently, from one extreme, a CAB that might be underfunded in its operational costs and what percentage they might be sitting at, and to the other extreme where a CAB may be overfunded their operational costs.
So through the chair, that does raise a very good point in terms of how the current model works in practice. The current model in practice, because it invests quite strictly on numbers of people in any particular area and the level of deprivation in that area, doesn't actually reflect the operational costs of any specific bureau, which this model can actually address. It can actually look at the operational needs of bureau in any particular area. The result of that, while the intention of that was very positive, and I want to acknowledge Council's approach to doing that, the result has been practically that some bureau have been receiving funds above what they actually need to operate on a day-to-day basis and deliver the service, which does mean that in some cases there are accumulated funds sitting with those bureau that would probably be higher than what many of us would probably deem desirable. On the opposite side, there will also be bureau which are running more sort of 3 or 4 month reserve levels, which is probably more in line with guidance. Council has decided on working with them to get to a 6 month model, which is at sort of the higher end of the recommended accumulated funds without any reserves management plan in place.
Right, so this really is more of an equitable funding model we're presenting at the moment, because but for the reasons that you've given, some are being funded maybe 50% of their operational costs and are struggling. Some are being funded perhaps 150% of their operational costs and accruing their reserves.
Through the chair, it's fair to say that there's probably some imbalance. I wouldn't know those figures exactly, but you can see through accumulated funds that those inequities or those differences and resourcing exist.
Thank you. And off the top of your head, do you know how many CABs are sitting on reserves of greater than 6 months?
That would be completely off the top of my head, but I think it's less than 6. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Kia ora. Thank you, Deputy Chair. Oh, Councillor Filipaina, have you got a question or just waiting to speak? Oh, I see, Pātai, sorry.
Yeah, just a Pātai for you, Chair. Again, I don't know how this is going to go when you put the vote or after the debate, but if option 3 is approved, as recommended by this committee, is there anything from your perspective as chair to get a report back to update your committee on how that, if option 3 is adopted, how that is going? So that's the question for you, whether it be in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, that there is an update from our CABs across Tāmaki, not ACABs. No problem, they've been set up. Is that something that you would entertain, Chair?
Kia ora, Councillor. Definitely, I'd probably like a maybe early update of implementation if it is option 3, but then also some forum, whether it's a workshop or the ability for local boards to feed in, and also the chairs of the individual CABs on how it's going. It obviously would have to, be at a 3 month, 6 month, something appropriate, but definitely a way, and I'm sure, and I'm looking at our officers, there'll be a way for that to come. Wouldn't be too much work, I imagine. Does that sound like what you would be presenting to us anyway?
Absolutely. We want to ensure that the application of it is transparent and that the council has confidence in the option that they've been recommended and select. So absolutely, we will be very open to reporting back to the committee at their pleasure.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, I think we've finished with questions. Councillor Fletcher, would you like to lead with some words? Or
I think it's largely been said, but never has there been a time in recent decades of the need for ACAB than right now. Rising unemployment, high interest rates, challenges to whānau, and I am really satisfied that we need to push option 3 through today in order that they can actually fulfil their strategic plan. So while we might have some individual reservations in terms of our own specific areas, this bulk funded model is going to give them the flexibility to be able to respond in an equitable way into the areas that they know where the need is most. So Kenneth, I want to thank you. I think this is an excellent piece of work. I'm sorry that we haven't had time on the agenda to actually hear directly from ACAB today, but I hope that they can understand how grateful we are all, especially in these really difficult times when people are looking for answers in their community. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Chair, I don't support option 3, so I'll call a division on this. I prefer something close to the status quo. And in saying this, I do want to thank Kenneth for, I think, picking up an issue that has been lingering for a long time. But respectfully, Chair, I thought this matter had been resolved quite some time ago. Yes, different people now, and the conversation's being repackaged. With respect to reserves, I find the conversation about why the Bureau have reserves, some Bureau have reserves, to be quite unhelpful, because some of these Bureau that have reserves, and actually they're incorporated societies, so that they're not a council office or something like that. But with respect to the Papakura Bureau, for example, why does it have reserves? It accrued reserves to establish Bureau services outside of Papakura, where there was a need in Franklin. And it's most likely now that with option 3, that funding will not be available in the foreseeable future, which is why I asked what would happen, what the officers knew about what could happen beyond financial year 24-25. And they didn't give an answer that addressed whether they felt that there would be closures. That question wasn't resolved. I can resolve that. It's likely that that satellite service will be the first physical Bureau service that will be discontinued, because we won't have the funding for that unless ACAB's got some new funding somewhere else that it can pitch, which would be great, but I doubt it. The individual Bureau from the south have, in my view, not been represented by ACAB. I think that it's a bit uncomfortable reflecting on the vacancy that exists. We could talk about that, but I take on board the reflections from Patricia Pera in Manarewa and Judy Boyd and Stu Britnell in Papakura. I take on board their advice quite seriously. So, Chair, I regret that the working party that was set up some years ago, and we talked through this, and we had a funding model which I thought we'd resolve by consensus, where no bureau was financially disadvantaged some years ago, through to option three, which I think is largely driven on a basis of bulk fund ACABX on a high trust expectation, um, and that they would be able to negotiate funding from central government. Good luck with that. Good luck with getting central government funding. I can't see it myself, but maybe I'm wrong. But there is no guarantee that the funding will um, assist some of the bureau that currently operate as incorporated societies with reserves, because quite frankly, I think there's tremendous interest in those reserves and expecting those bureaus that have reserves to expend them first, when sometimes those reserves are built up for a very good reason. So, Chair, I'm sorry, I don't like to be negative about this agenda, but I can't support these recommendations, and I would wish to have my vote recorded against. So I'll call a division. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. Councillor Filipaina.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, firstly, I just want to acknowledge the chair of ACABX and another representative that spoke to both myself and Councillor Foley in regards to the agenda item that we now see in front of us. So I just want to meet to them and say thank you so much. My concerns still haven't been allayed, Chair, in regards to, and I go back to, I've got an email going back to and subsequently right through from 2 terms ago around the CAB and the funding model that Councillor Newman just mentioned and the working group. I've got all the minutes there and we were close, but then at a previous PEP committee chair, I mentioned the fact I had it and just said to staff if they wish to see the history to this, is to let me know. They couldn't find the history. They didn't know the history, but I didn't get a call. So, I'll just leave it at that in regards to it. Chair, I still have my concerns around the funding model and the fact that it's going to depend on the strategic and regional outcomes. When I had a look at the catchment areas and I was thinking of the sub-regional list that I ended up referring to in number 14 of the committee agenda. I mean, there's going to be so many different approaches to our CABs in each area. When you have in the Manukau ward, for example, the majority of the people in that ward are Pacifica. Yes, I understand that Māori outcomes is one that needs to be put in there. But when you have a ward as you do at the Manukau ward, where the majority is about 89 to 90% Pacifica, whereas Māori outcomes or Pacifica outcomes for that. I understand the issues around the Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I will not be supporting option 3, but Chair, if it does go through, option 3 goes through, I'm heartened with your response and also what you indicated that the staff and the response from Duncan, which is yes, we will come back to you with how this option, if it is approved, how we're getting on with it. So I'm heartened, Chair, that you've said it. The other issue is that one of the emails, and that was with the Environmental and Community Committee at the time, there was an issue around the funding where Otara, CAB, for example, when they had a look at the ACAB's funding model working with council, their increase was $27. And I don't know, I don't think you get enough McDonald's for $27, but this is why I have concerns that we haven't done the work, I believe, sufficient enough. So, Chair, I will not be supporting option 3, but again, heartened that if it does get approved, that you have indicated that there will be some reporting back. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. I think last speak, I'll say a few words, but Councillor Foley, would you like to speak as well?
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I think I should because it's one of the rare times that I am going to vote differently to my brother in Manukau, to my matua as well, Councillor Filipaina. I'm going to support the recommendation put forward by the staff, firstly because it is strongly recommended by staff, by ACABX, and also by 17 out of 20 of the local boards, including the Franklin local board. So, I'm really mindful of that. Secondly, I think what we're doing here, what we're seeing is a move from an inflexible model to a flexible model, which I support as well. And I think by doing that, we're able to have that regional view. ACABX is able to have more discretion, and then they can respond to areas of most need, as Councillor Fletcher said. And I'm really mindful when I met with, the two members from ACABX, I was thinking all of that time about Otara, the Otara CAB that really, really is, in the heart of an area of high deprivation and always is operating on virtually nothing. And they're always, crying out for more help. The volunteers that they have themselves come from families of high need. So I was sitting there when we did meet thinking about Otara, thinking about Papatoetoe as well in a similar situation, and Maangele. And I believe this more flexible model will allow a more equitable distribution of the funds for our CABs, not just for my area, but across the whole of our city. Also, when I was the chair of the local board, we had a similar experience with a different funding model that was also inflexible because we had inherited a system where we were giving a certain amount of money uncontested to certain organisations in our local board area. But by the time I became chair, what I saw is that some of those organisations were using that money and distributing it and using it for the initiatives they said they were going to, but others were banking it. And we had this really undesirable situation where you had some organisations banking the money. They weren't doing it out of a bad intention or anything like that, but they just banked the money, and so we were giving them year on year hundreds of thousands of dollars that they were just banking and not using for the purpose that they said they were using it for. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here with these CABs, but I'm just understanding the difference between having an inflexible model without any discretion versus a much more flexible model where you can exercise discretion, where you can look at the needs for the different areas, and then you can distribute the money accordingly. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to support the recommendations put forward. Kia ora. Thank you, and sorry, Councillor Alf. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Foley. And just, briefly from me, tautoko what Councillor Foley has said. I wasn't wedded to a option before this, but obviously when ACAB spoke to us at the last PEP committee, they were clear that this has come from the organisation as opposed to from us, which in the past, I think Environment and Community Committee some time ago, that came from a kind of a council-focused situation, and it did get voted down at the time, and we tried to work a new way through. Then obviously we had the tough time last year with sort of the threat to maybe no funding, and of course we all worked to make sure that funding was protected. So there is only one local board that supports the status quo, and because these are hyper-local services but funded regionally, that I think I could only support a direction which says, only one local board doesn't support this direction. And I do hope, and I know, and the staff have said to me that they will work with the local boards who don't, the two local boards who don't support this direction, to make sure that they can get as much out of it as possible as the 17 who support the options will. So it is a new way of doing things, but I think it is a good way forward, and we'll just make sure, as Councillor Filipaina has asked for and pointed out, that we have that clear, transparent way forward to make sure everyone is okay as we go forward. So I know there's been a division called, so we'll go through that now. Kia ora.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you're voting on a division on Item 12, which is on your screen, councillor Hills.
In favour, thank you.
Hills 4. Member Ashby.
Aye.
Councillor Baker.
4.
Councillor Bartley.
4.
Mayor Brown.
Yes.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Ferry.
4.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Fooley.
4.
Member Wilcox. Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Lee. Councillor Leone.
4.
Councillor Newman.
I'm opposed.
Councillor Sayers.
4.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. 4. Councillor Stewart.
4.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker. Okay, so just mark him as absent. Councillor Watson. 4. Councillor Williamson.
4.
Just put absent.
Chair, it's Councillor Newman here. Can I request a recount on that, please?
We might not go through it again, but I can send you an email if you'd like.
I'll wait for special votes.
Kia ora. You never know these days what happens. Thank you, councillors.
So that's
that process.
passed 18 to 2.
Thank you, members. We will just have a 5-minute break, just so everyone can have a comfort stop, and there's some biscuits and tea. So we'll just have a 5-minute break. Thank you.